everyone, Professor King here. In this video, I will be discussing the Norton chapter on arguing a position, which is pretty similar to the chapter on arguing. It just goes into greater depth. Then at the end of this video, I'll have some questions for you to consider as you read Bearman and Amrhein's Internalized Sexism, Girls, Women, and Internalized Sexism, the reading that's on Canvas. I'll also show you how you can access that reading on the Fullerton College website in case the permalink that I provided on Canvas is having any issues. So without further ado, I'll take it to a share screen and I'll make sure that, this goes at a nice pace. So chapter 13 of the text, depending on, again, which edition of the textbook you have, the one I have is chapter 13. It talks about arguing a position, and I'm going to go over some key features and just review some things with all of you. So as you may recall, arguments provide a clear and arguable position with necessary background information, good reasons, and convincing evidence. If you think about the essays we're starting to get back that I've graded and reviewed and given you my feedback on, what you'll notice is if any parts of this list are lacking, and I'll talk more about what else is involved in this list in a moment, but if any of these are lacking, I point them out to make sure that students know that you need all of these things for an argument, right? You need your own educated opinion, otherwise known as a thesis statement, otherwise known as a clear and arguable position that directly and thoroughly addresses the prompt given. You need to provide necessary background information, meaning just enough so that you and your reader are on the same page and your reader can follow your argument. You don't want to give too much that they get lost in the tangent you're going off on. You don't want to give so little that it's not clear to them what's going on. It's really a balancing act. You also need to provide good reasons, and the reasons are both in the form of your claims, which are the sub-arguments that harken back to your overall thesis, but also your analysis, that plan of explaining why and how something is the way it is, why it's important for your readers to know that, what effect it has on the audience, et cetera, et cetera. And clearly, you need convincing evidence in the form of not just the text you're looking at, but then any outside research that you do. You also need to appeal to readers' values. And what you'll notice in the text that we're looking at, right, talking about something like internalized sexism, well, we may get people who automatically hear words like sexism or patriarchy or misogyny and go, oh, I don't want to listen to that. Those are those angry, whiny feminists, right? And they may shut off. But what you notice that our writers do is they talk about how these phenomena, how these items, sexism, oppression, patriarchy, misogyny, et cetera, how one, those aren't just perpetrated by one group, but they're perpetrated by everyone. And therefore, if they're perpetrated by everyone, then they affect everyone. So what you'll see in the reading that I'll talk about in a moment is it appeals to readers' values because sexism is a problem for all of us, not just one group versus another, but again, this whole ideological framework in which all of us are engaging. Men, women, people who are gender nonconforming, gender non-binary, people who are trans, people who are gender fluid. It affects all of us. You also need to have a trustworthy tone, and any writer needs to have a trustworthy tone, not just you when you're writing your essay, but the readings that you're reading. And so what is involved in that? Well, the person's intellectual reputation, the way that the person addresses their audience, the language that they use, the amount of research that they've done, right? All of these go into trustworthiness, whether or not we see it explicitly in the tone or we understand it as we're going. Also, we need to consider carefully other positions to show that we're remaining objective, right? We're not cheerleaders, and being a cheerleader is fine, but anyone who's ever done cheer knows that right, wrong, or indifferent, your job as a cheerleader is to cheer for your side. Even if they've been the most losingest team for the last 50 years, your job as a cheerleader is to support that team. We're not cheerleaders in writing. We are not people who, pick a side and stay with it forever, sometimes to our detriment. We look at all the different sides of an issue and we say, okay, now where do I stand, right? It'd be like if you were the cheerleader on the losing team and you saw the winning team that were respectful and were nice to the other teams and showed great sportspersonship and all those sorts of things. And you said, oh, you know what? I'll go cheer for them while still acknowledging the merits of my team. That's kind of that's what would happen if we used the rules of writing and applied it to cheerleading. So how do we write arguments? Well, as you've seen, like I said, with the first essay, you choose a topic. Generally, in this kind of setting, you choose it based on the prompts you're given. Then we generate ideas, and I've already talked about that at length in another video, so I'll save you time here. But as you're brainstorming, cubing, asking the reporters questions, looping, free writing, whatever you do to brainstorm, dictating, think about questions you have about the text or topic, maybe things intellectually that were a challenge for you as you read it, and go back to those so that you can pick them apart a little bit further. And also think about your life, your interests, the parts of the text that you're responding to that spoke to you personally. A lot of people, when they respond to something like Sunny's Blues, right, they talk about their own experience with things like addiction or racism or classism or religion. And that is what drives the argument they make about the text. We don't realize it, but we really, as we get older, we start to do that more and more and more, especially in the college experience, because, we are sort of, we're drawn to things that draw us in, that seem familiar or interesting to us in some way. So as you read a text, think about what that is, and then start to generate those ideas. Always consider the rhetorical situation. You are the writer, right? Unless you're reading another work and then you are the audience. Think about who the writer is, who the writer's audience is. And again, don't say everybody when you're talking about audience. There's, even the Bible has people who are not interested in being the Bible's audience. So even the books that you think everybody reads, not necessarily, right? So you have to think about, who is this writer? For whom did this person craft this text? Who did they have in mind when they were crafting this text? And then who were maybe some surprises in terms of audience? Why did the person write this text, particularly for this audience? What is their stance? What position are they taking? And how are they getting this across? Is this a film? Is it a sculpture? Is it an essay? Is it the chapter of an anthology? Is it a novel? What is it, right? How are they getting their point across? And what tools are they using, given that medium, given that those design specifications to do so? And again, if I'm going fast, just remember to pause and go back as you need to. Ask yourself as you're generating ideas in text, can I argue about this topic? And if you can, come up with a strong working thesis. If you have a lot to say about a text, that's a good thing. You almost want to err on the side of being able to say too much as opposed to too little. But the problem with that is you also have to have a focus and a scope, right? So you want to start with a lot and then whittle your way down. But in that whittling, you have to consider, like, what am I arguing about this thing? How do I feel about it? Not just how did I intellectualize it and summarize it, but how do I feel about it in response to the prompt I'm given? And then follow the, general outline of drafting. Highlight and annotate, then brainstorm, maybe create an outline or a visual map, perform some research, draft, revise, and don't look at this section down here. Don't look at it as linear. Look at it more as circular, in that if any of these points along the way you have to return to, don't feel like you did a one-off and that's it, because that's not how writing works. If you have a working draft, but maybe it's a page short, go back to the brainstorming portion of your drafting and see if you can't add more somewhere. If you've got a ton of stuff, but one section doesn't necessarily fit, try and figure out an outline to organize it so that it does. And if it still doesn't, get rid of it, find something else in a brainstorm, and then research, you know? So in other words, this is kind of the general pattern, but at any point along the way, if you need to go back and do a little more, do it. You know how to at this point. And always end on revising, right? Always end on revising so that you're doing the cleanup at the end and it's not slowing you down as you go. Make sure that you qualify your thesis. And I've talked again in another video about those qualifying terms that you can find in the textbook, right? Sometimes under these conditions, with these groups, at this time, right? Those qualifying words so that we don't become all or nothing, right? We're not saying all Christians do this, anyone who's not a Christian does that, right? Because you're getting into absolutist language and you don't want to do that because, again, human experience is incredibly complex and often contradictory. So we need those qualifying words to help explain certain groups and situations better. Again, present those solid claims at the beginning of your body paragraphs that support the overall argument you're making. Use relevant, appropriate, credible, and well-documented evidence that goes along with, that supports the claim that you're making. Don't make one claim and then the evidence has nothing to do with it. They need to interlock, right? They need to have something to do with one another. And get to the stage where you can start to identify and acknowledge other positions. But when we're doing that, we're showing why ours is still the preferable one over all the other positions we have. So for example, the other night I went to a friend's house and they had Hawaiian pizza. And I know this is a real contentious one, right? You know, my position was, oh, I love Hawaiian pizza. I'll take a couple slices. My friend's wife said, I don't like Hawaiian pizza. You have all the Hawaiian pizza. I don't really care for it. Somebody else said, either way, right? I'll see what else is out there. We've got some meat lovers, we've got a vegetarian, you know? So if we were looking at it in terms of pizza, there's not just pepperoni or cheese. There's not just Hawaiian or not Hawaiian, right? There is a plethora. Walk into any Little Caesars on any given day, or, you know, Mod or Blaze Fire Spit Grill or whatever. There's like a billion of them now, right? Go into any one of those on any given day and you're going to have more than two options. And then extending this analogy further back into the writing realm, if you know that there's more than two options for pizza, there's probably more than two options for an argument. And so we have to look at all of the sides of an issue and say, here's the people who believe X, here's the people who believe Y, here's the people who believe Z, here's the people who believe T, and here's where I am, somewhere in there. And here is why in my argument, essentially, right? All right, we've talked in previous videos about organizing an argument. I know I've given you my visual map. Hopefully that helps. This is an example of it here. If you want to review it, if you're more comfortable with an outline, you know, go nuts on an outline. The book even has these weird, wacky, like box charts you can make where you jump from one to the next. Whatever helps you best. Keep that in mind. So when we get to writing out the drafts, I've mentioned this before, and again, if it helps you, try this out. Don't start with the intro, start with the body paragraphs, then summarize the overall argument you have once you've finished your first draft of the body paragraphs into a working thesis and plan. Because if you have your body paragraph claims, you've got the list of claims for your plan. And if you've got the list of claims for your plan, you can summarize those into a 1 to 2 sentence overall argument. So again, it's working backward. For those of you who, if you don't know what you're going to say right off the bat, work through it and then go back and put it on. And then in your conclusion, wrap up and leave a lasting impression. That's where those of you who are obsessed with hooks, and you know I said, I'm but one professor, but I hate a hook. That's where you can, in my class anyway, leave that hooky kind of statement is in your lasting impression in the conclusion. I know you're going to have other professors who say, I love hooks, hooks are great. I'm not one of them. So just keep that in mind. Keep in mind design elements. Usually on the back of a prompt, I give you the template for what a heading looks like. It's got to be Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, 1-inch margins with a proper heading and a proper works cited list. If you notice this heading right here, it's the same font, it's the same type, it's the same size as the rest of the essay, right? It's not bold, it's not underlined, it's not in huge size font, it's the same. So keep that in mind. And on the left-hand side, you have your name, my name, the class, and the date. Then top right, you've got your last name and the page number. And we've talked about collaboration before, but remember that collaboration is important. You want to get reviewed not just from yourself, but from your peers. And your peers can be your classmates, can be me, can be people at the Writing Center, can be people who've taken an English 100 course before. You know, workshop what you have at whatever level you can workshop, and make sure to ask if it's clear, if it's thorough, if it's persuasive, and if it's objective. Or if you want to use the workshop guidelines that I've given in previous workshops, go nuts. And make sure you get feedback from as many reliable people as possible. And I stress reliable because I always get those students who say like, well, I asked my uncle. And I can say, okay, what's your uncle's writing background? I don't know, he hasn't taken a writing class in 25 years, but I like him. Is he the most reliable? Possibly not, right? Like if it's kind of old and crusty for him to remember all this stuff, you might want to try the Writing Center instead. You might want to try a class peer instead. You might want to try coming to my office hours or emailing me instead. And then again, have faith in yourselves. Know that those rumblings you have in your brain and in your gut about, oh, this might not be working, this might be working, they're usually correct. And so make sure, again, you give yourself that time to edit and proofread for content, mechanics, formatting, and organization and structure, because the cleaner it looks on the page, the easier it's going to be for your reader to follow. Also ask yourself, okay, what are my strengths? What's working in this essay? And what do I still need to work on to really make it pop? What am I learning as I'm writing this? What am I realizing about what I like and dislike? What am I realizing about the argument that I'm making? Is it consistent the whole way throughout? And I'm going to talk about guiding your reader, and I'm actually going to show you in a moment how the writers that we see guide the reader and how that's going to help you with discussion board number 9, because they have a bit longer of a piece of writing, right? They don't have a 3 to 4 page essay. They've got a whole chapter of an anthology. So because of that, it's a little longer, and they need to use different things to guide their readers. They've got things like titles and subtitles. They've got a bibliography at the end. They've got charts and graphs. So it helps you along as you go. Now for you, you have shorter essays, and they just need to be thesis-driven essays. So for your sort of bare bones essays that you're writing, make sure you have a catchy title. Make sure that, bam, once we're in the intro, you've got that killer thesis statement that thoroughly and clearly addresses the prompt, that's thought-provoking, and that, again, provides those qualifiers, those parameters of what your argument's going to talk about. And so that's how we guide our reader at the beginning, right? Heading, title, thesis statement. In your body paragraphs, make sure you're utilizing transitions. Make sure you're utilizing organization techniques. And again, if you have this old copy of the book on page 349 in this chapter, it kind of lays out different ways of guiding your reader and using transitions, right? At the very end of chapter 34, we've got all that here. So yours may be on a different page, but look for that. And that, I guess as they say is that. Before I go though, I do want to show you a little bit of how Bearman and Amrhein guide their reader so that when you access this reading on EBSCOhost on the library website, that you are doing so correctly, you're only reading what you need to read, and you're kind of following along with the subheadings that we're looking at. So let me pull this up for us really quickly. Okay, I'll take it to a share screen here. So in front of you, you should see the library website. And I've taken the liberty of putting the name of the full work that it's from, which is Internalized Oppression. And I decided I'm going to search for it here. Takes me to an EBSCOhost page, and it's the very first one at the top of the EBSCOhost page. It's a full book. It's an ebook. So this is not just a journal article or a short newspaper clipping. This is a whole book. So when you click on it, it takes you to the description of the whole anthology, the whole book. And if you look on the left here, you can download the whole thing if you've got like, you know, megabytes to burn. It's got a PDF and it's got an EPUB. So what I would say to do is look over the table of contents on the left-hand side here. And in the table of contents, you're actually going to go to part 4, socially devalued groups. I have to sign in. I may have to take it off the share screen for a moment. Okay, let me take it back now. Okay. So when I click on part 4, I see that chapter 8 is the chapter that I'm looking for, is the chapter that Professor King assigned. So I go to chapter 8, which is entitled Girls, Women, and Internalized Sexism by Steve Bearman and Marielle Amrhein. Okay. If you look here at the bottom of the page, you see that this chapter starts on page 191 of the entire ebook. So that might be helpful if you get lost to know that you go to page 191. And then you can just skip forward and back pages here. You can also maximize and minimize the page as you need to, so that way, you know, the text per page is pretty big. So if you want to make it a little bit smaller, you can do that so that you can read more easily. And then we have little like subheadings of chapter 8. If you look here, right? And the discussion board number 9 that I have up on Canvas, it actually asks you about the practices of internalized sexism. So if you click there, it'll take you to that subheading that you want to go to, right? So does internalized sexism like protect against externalized sexism? Then we scroll down. And again, you're supposed to be reading this whole thing. I'm just helping you kind of find where you need to go, okay? And here we have the practices of internalized sexism, page 1, very bottom of page 199, okay? They're listed there. And then if you look, right, sorry, I don't mean to keep scrolling back up and down if that's bugging anyone's eyes. If you look, we have powerlessness, objectification, loss of self, et cetera, et cetera. Now look what happens when we outline these and then we move on with this chapter of the text. The practices, the first one being powerlessness, okay? And then after that, before we get to the next problem, we'll say, or practice of internalized sexism, we have a solution. We have another subheading that talks about reclaiming power. This is very important as you're reading a longer text like this, so that you can kind of, again, pre-read and prepare yourself for, okay, if we go back to the beginning of the chapter, they've got the title, they've got chapter 8, they've got their names, right? At the very top, they give each one, Marielle and Steve, give a little personal anecdote to help illustrate what's going to be talked about. And instead of like us, where we just dive right straight into an intro and a thesis, this is a lot longer, right? We've got a lot more to read. So we start with sort of a setup with these premises so that the reader and the writer can, again, be on the same page and we know what we're going to talk about. And then we go into the reading and we look at different kinds of sexism, and we talk, at length about this notion of internalized sexism. But then again, we get to the practices where they're listed. And then again, once they're listed, we go into a subheading with each one categorized, right? Internalized powerlessness, which is the issue, and then essentially kind of a solution, which is reclaiming power, right? Then the next issue is internalized objectification, right? That's the issue, that's the practice. But remember, before we get to number 3, we've got to look at another subheading, which allows us to come up with solutions for that problematic practice, right? So this is why when I talk about guiding the reader, that's why it's important. Because imagine if this whole reading, this whole more than 200-page book were just all in paragraphs and there was no sort of guide, no subheadings, no chapters, no setup, right? It would be much harder to navigate a book like this. But we have those to help guide us. So use that to your own advantage as you're reading and as you're looking at the discussion board prompt. I'll take it off stop share now. But make sure you're reading that whole chapter so that you understand this concept, this notion, because there is another essay coming up, and these readings are, the readings that will be up for grabs in this unit on gender, right? So keep that in mind. All right, well, I hope this helped. If any questions, comments, or concerns arise, you know where to find me. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening, week, weekend, whenever you're watching this, whatever. All right, bye.